For as long as humanity could remember, they had always been the underdog. The vast Galactic Council, an alliance of ancient and powerful species, had laughed at Earth's primitive technology, short lifespans, and chaotic history. To them, the galaxy was filled with civilizations that had existed for millions of years, their technology so advanced that humanity's greatest achievements seemed like the clumsy attempts of a child. No one took Earth seriously. Humans were denied entry into the Galactic Council, ignored in interstellar politics, and left to struggle on their own, while the rest of the universe flourished under the rule of species who considered themselves superior. Earth had always been the punchline of a cosmic joke, until the day the joke was no longer funny. It began without warning. A black void appeared at the edge of the galaxy, swallowing entire star systems in complete silence. The Council first thought it was a natural phenomenon. But then came the signal's desperate distress calls from civilizations that had ruled for eons, their voices filled with terror before they were abruptly cut off. Fleets were sent to investigate, but none returned. Planets that had stood for millions of years were reduced to dust. No one knew who the enemy was. No demands were made, no warnings given, only destruction. The mighty Galactic Council, which had once dismissed humanity as nothing more than an insignificant species, now found itself standing at the edge of annihilation. In their desperation, they searched for any species that might have a solution, a weapon, or even an idea. And that was when, for the first time, they turned to Earth. A fleet of Council ships arrived in orbit, broadcasting an urgent request for an audience with Earth's leaders. Humanity watched in quiet amusement as the same species that had mocked them for centuries now came begging for help. The Galactic Council, once so proud and untouchable, was now humbled by fear. Their ambassadors, beings who had once scoffed at the very idea of humans being equals, spoke with desperation in their voices. They admitted that their fleets had been decimated, their strongest weapons useless, their greatest minds unable to comprehend the enemy they faced. They needed soldiers, warriors who could fight without fear, who could think in ways no other species could. They needed humans. The response was not what they expected. Earth did not immediately accept the plea. Humanity had not forgotten the years of humiliation, the rejection, and the way they had been treated as little more than pests in the grand design of the universe. The Galactic Council had always claimed that humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, too reckless. And now, when everything they had built was crumbling, they wanted that same recklessness to save them. The irony was not lost on anyone. Earth's leaders took their time, watching as the alien ambassadors squirmed under the weight of their own desperation. The Council had come expecting immediate compliance, assuming that humanity would leap at the chance to prove itself worthy of their acceptance. But they had underestimated the one thing humans had mastered better than any other species: the ability to adapt, to survive, and to strike only when the moment was right. The silence from Earth stretched for days. The Council grew restless, terrified that their last hope might refuse to help. Then, finally, humanity responded. A message was broadcast across the Council's network, simple and direct. "We will fight," it said. But there was a condition. No longer would Earth be treated as a lesser species. No longer would they be ignored, ridiculed, or excluded. If humanity was to fight this war, they would do it on their own terms. The Council had no choice but to agree. They had no other options left. And so, for the first time in history, the universe watched as Earth prepared for war. But what the Council did not know, what no one had ever suspected, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment long before the enemy had arrived. The galaxy had spent centuries underestimating humans, dismissing them as weak, failing to notice that Earth had been studying the universe just as closely. While the Council had grown complacent in their superiority, humanity had been learning, developing, and evolving in the shadows. They had built weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They had created warships designed not for grand displays of power, but for raw, efficient destruction. They had trained soldiers who could adapt in ways no alien mind could predict. While the galaxy had laughed, humanity had been sharpening its teeth. As the first wave of human warships left Earth's orbit, there was an unspoken shift in the balance of power. The species that had been ridiculed, ignored, and underestimated was now stepping onto the battlefield. And as the Galactic Council watched those ships disappear into the void, they realized something chilling. The cosmic joke was over, and humanity was no longer laughing. The Galactic Council expected immediate cooperation. They had come to Earth with desperate pleas, their voices filled with urgency, their once arrogant posture replaced by fear. Their worlds were burning, their fleets vanishing into the darkness, and the enemy, an unstoppable force consuming entire civilizations, had left them with no choice but to turn to the one species they had spent centuries mocking. Humanity had always been the outsider, the ignored, the insignificant. Now, in their most desperate hour, the mighty council stood before Earth's leaders, begging for help. But the response they received was not what they had anticipated. Humanity refused. Shock rippled through the alien ambassadors as they processed the rejection. No species had ever denied the council before, especially not a young race like humanity. For centuries, Earth had been excluded from interstellar affairs, denied access to advanced technology, and laughed at for its chaotic history. The council had ruled that humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, too reckless to be trusted with power. They had dismissed Earth's achievements as crude imitations of superior alien advancements. And yet, in this moment of crisis, they had expected humanity to forget all of that and fight on their behalf. They believed desperation would force the humans to comply. They were wrong. Earth's leaders stood firm, their faces unreadable as the council's ambassadors grew frantic. They spoke of destruction beyond imagination, of planets erased from existence, of a darkness that spread with terrifying speed. They painted horrifying images of empires falling, of billions of lives lost in an instant, of fleets reduced to dust without a single warning. But no matter how desperately they pleaded, humanity did not waver. The silence in the great meeting chamber was suffocating. The council representatives, who had always considered themselves the rulers of the galaxy, now stood powerless before a species they had once ignored. The aliens could not understand it. Every other civilization in the galaxy would have accepted the request without hesitation. The chance to be recognized, to gain favor with the council, to finally be treated as equals, what species would refuse that? But humans were not like the others. They had learned from their past. They had watched as countless civilizations had placed their trust in the council, only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Humanity had spent centuries fighting its own wars, surviving disasters, and enduring hardships without ever once calling upon the council for help. And now, when the council needed them the most, humanity saw no reason to answer. The alien ambassadors scrambled to regain control of the conversation. They spoke of rewards, of alliances, of a future where Earth would finally be recognized as a true power in the galaxy. They promised technology beyond human imagination, access to resources that could transform Earth into a utopia, a seat at the council's table, where they would have an equal voice. But humanity had already seen the price of those promises. The council had offered the same deals to other species before, only to abandon them the moment they were no longer needed. Earth was not so easily deceived. For the first time in their history, the council felt true fear, not of the enemy that was consuming their worlds, but of the species standing before them. The humans were not refusing out of weakness, nor out of ignorance. They were refusing because they understood something that the council had never considered. Humanity did not need the council. The council needed humanity. And that changed everything. As the meeting dragged on, tensions grew thick. The ambassadors whispered among themselves, their desperation becoming more visible with every passing moment. They had come expecting compliance, believing that humans would be so eager for recognition that they would leap at the opportunity. But now, standing in this room, facing the silent, unyielding expressions of Earth's leaders, they realized their mistake. They had miscalculated. The refusal was not a negotiation tactic. It was not an attempt to bargain for better terms. It was a statement, a declaration that humanity would not be used as a tool. The council had spent centuries dismissing Earth as insignificant, treating them as a lesser species unworthy of respect. And now, when they needed humanity's strength, they expected that past to be forgotten. The ambassadors, realizing that their pleas were failing, turned to desperation. They warned of the enemy's growing strength, of the horrors that awaited if humanity did nothing. They spoke of a future where Earth itself would fall, where no planet would be safe, where the enemy's advance would consume everything in its path. But the humans only listened, silent and unmoved. They had faced extinction before. They had fought against impossible odds. And they had survived without the Council's help. They would not be frightened into submission. Now, ASE, the meeting reached its end. The Galactic Council's delegation left with heavy steps, their mission a failure. They had come expecting obedience and found defiance. They had sought to command and found resistance. For the first time in their long history, they had been refused. And as they returned to their ships, a chilling realization settled upon them. Humanity was not afraid. And that, more than anything, terrified them. The Galactic Council left Earth in frustration, unable to comprehend how humanity could refuse their desperate plea. They had expected compliance, even gratitude, but instead they had been rejected. As they returned to their crumbling empire, whispers of Earth's defiance spread across the stars. Many believed it was arrogance, that humans were foolish to turn their backs on the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Others thought it was a bluff, an attempt to bargain for greater rewards. But the truth was something far more unsettling, something the Council and the rest of the galaxy had never considered. Humanity had refused their call for help not out of pride or greed, but because they did not need the Council. While the rest of the universe had laughed at Earth, ridiculing them as primitive and insignificant, humanity had been preparing for a war of its own. They had been keeping a secret. And now, as the galaxy faced its greatest threat, hidden beneath the surface of the moon, buried deep within asteroids, and concealed in the vast emptiness of space, humanity had built something no one had expected: a war fleet, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While the great empires of the Council had relied on their ancient technologies and outdated strategies, humanity had spent centuries experimenting, innovating, and designing weapons that defied conventional logic. Their warships were not massive, slow-moving behemoths like those of the Council. They were sleek, fast, and equipped with devastating firepower. Their soldiers were not bred for combat like the warrior species of the galaxy, but they had something far more dangerous: the ability to adapt, to improvise, and to fight with a level of unpredictability that no alien mind could match. The Council had spent so much time mocking Earth that they had never realized humanity was watching, learning, and waiting. The warships, hidden for years in deep space, began to awaken. Silent engines hummed to life, weapon systems powered up, and crews took their positions. The fleet had been built in secret, away from the prying eyes of the Council, constructed not for conquest but for survival. Humanity had known, long before the rest of the galaxy, that a day like this would come. They had seen the patterns in history, the rise and fall of civilizations, the overconfidence of empires that believed they would rule forever, the inevitable moment when something stronger emerged from the darkness. They had never trusted the Council to protect them, never relied on the promises of beings who saw them as inferior. So, while the galaxy had looked down on Earth, humanity had been sharpening its weapons in the shadows. As the enemy force continued its relentless advance, consuming entire systems without mercy, the Council's defenses crumbled. Their mighty fleets, once thought invincible, were torn apart like paper. Their most advanced weapons barely scratched the enemy's armor. The creatures, if they could even be called that, moved with impossible speed, their ships operating on unknown principles, their attacks unpredictable and devastating. The Council, for all its arrogance, had no answer. The strongest empires, the most intelligent species, the rulers of the stars, all of them fell one by one. And in the heart of the chaos, as the last desperate cries for help echoed across the void, humanity finally moved. The first sign was a transmission, intercepted by a dying Council fleet as it fled a burning system. It was not a distress call, nor a plea for aid. It was a simple, chilling message: engagement protocols activated. Initiating counteroffensive. The Council did not understand. There had been no reports of human fleets mobilizing, no signs of military preparations. But as they watched their screens, something impossible happened. The battle that followed would be remembered for generations. The enemy, which had torn through the strongest fleets in the galaxy without effort, suddenly found itself facing something it had never encountered before: resistance. Human ships moved unlike anything the Council had seen. They did not follow the rigid formations of traditional fleets. They weaved between enemy fire, striking with ruthless precision, their weapons unleashing energy bursts and kinetic projectiles designed to cripple, not just damage. The enemy, which had never been forced to adapt, was caught off guard. They had expected another easy victory, another civilization to crush beneath their might. Instead, they faced chaos. Human pilots fought without fear, their minds calculating strategies in real time, adjusting with every move the enemy made. Their weapons, built with experimental technology, tore through the enemy's hulls, exploiting weaknesses no other species had even noticed. And then came the ground forces soldiers, unlike any the galaxy had ever known. While other species relied on genetic superiority or cybernetic enhancements, humans relied on something far more terrifying: their will to survive. The Council watched in disbelief as humanity did what no other species had done before they pushed the enemy back. The unstoppable force that had consumed worlds without hesitation now found itself on the defensive. The same humans who had been mocked, ignored, and excluded from the great affairs of the galaxy were now leading the charge against an existential threat. And in that moment, the truth became clear to everyone. The secret was out. Humanity had never been weak. They had never been helpless. They had never been the fools the Council believed them to be. They had simply been waiting. Waiting for the right moment, waiting for the universe to realize its mistake, waiting for the day they would no longer have to hide. And now, as their warships filled the sky, as their soldiers fought with a fury the enemy had never encountered, the rest of the galaxy finally understood. The humans had not refused the Council out of arrogance. They had refused because they knew something the Council did not: that the fate of the galaxy would not be decided by those who ruled it in peace, but by those who had prepared for war. The enemy fleet drifted through the void, an endless wall of monstrous warships that had already burned through hundreds of worlds. Entire civilizations had been erased, their histories turned to ash, their screams lost in the silence of space. The Galactic Council, once arrogant in its power, had been reduced to a trembling shadow of itself, desperately clinging to survival. No species had been able to stop the invaders. No fleet had survived an encounter. No weapon had been strong enough to leave even a scratch. The enemy was invincible. Or at least, that was what the galaxy had believed until the humans proved them wrong. For years, humanity had been ignored, dismissed as a minor race too primitive to be of any importance. The Council had kept Earth at arm's length, refusing to share technology, refusing to allow them a seat among the great empires of the stars. But humans had not wasted time begging for acceptance. Instead, they had watched, studied, and prepared. The day the enemy arrived, humanity did not react with panic like the others. They did not send desperate pleas for help. They did not retreat into the darkness, hoping to be spared. They prepared for war. And now, as the enemy's warships moved closer to what they believed was just another doomed world, the first human strike began. From the depths of space, hidden behind the icy rings of a dead planet, a fleet of black warships powered to life. They were nothing like the grand, towering dreadnoughts of the Council or the massive, hulking battlecruisers of the older empires. They were smaller, faster, deadlier. They had no wasted space, no unnecessary bulk. Every inch of their design had been created for one purpose: destruction. These ships did not move in rigid formations like the fleets of the past. They darted through the void like shadows, their trajectories unpredictable, their speed unmatched. The enemy had never fought anything like them before. The first strike was precise, surgical. Human ships emerged from the darkness and unleashed their fury. Kinetic railguns, plasma lances, high-velocity missile barrages all fired at once. But these were not ordinary weapons. Humanity had been studying the enemy, dissecting their wreckage, running endless simulations. They had learned what no one else had: the enemy could be hurt. The trick was hitting them in the right places. The first explosion rippled through the enemy's front line, a blast so sudden and unexpected that even their seemingly perfect coordination faltered. The Council, watching from their last strongholds, could not believe what they were seeing. They had thought Earth would be the next to burn, the next to disappear in silence. Instead, they were witnessing something that had never happened before: humanity pushing the enemy back. They had assumed the humans' refusal to help earlier had been a sign of fear. But now they understood the truth. Humanity had refused because they did not need the Council. They had been planning their own war. The enemy tried to adjust, to counterattack, but the humans were faster. They did not fight with the rigid, predictable strategies of the older empires. They did not follow the traditional doctrines of war. They adapted instantly. If a formation was broken, they reformed in seconds. If an enemy ship survived a hit, they adjusted their weapons and hit harder. If the enemy thought they had figured out a pattern, humanity changed it. They fought like predators, like a species that had evolved through war, that had sharpened itself across centuries of conflict. And as the battle raged on, it became clear that this was not just a counterattack. This was an extermination. The humans had not come to defend. They had come to eliminate. Their warships were relentless, their weapons cutting through the enemy's hulls like fire through paper. Their soldiers, deployed in boarding operations, moved with terrifying efficiency, planting explosives, hacking systems, turning the enemy's own technology against them. For the first time, the invaders felt fear. They had never encountered resistance like this. They had never been forced to defend themselves. They had never lost. Until now, in the heart of the battle, at the very center of the chaos, the largest enemy warship, a monstrous thing that had reduced entire planets to dust, was struck by a single, silent projectile. Not a missile, not a bomb, but a simple piece of metal moving at an impossible speed. It tore through the ship's armor, cutting through layers of alien alloys as if they were paper, and in an instant, the impossible happened. The ship imploded. The shockwave spread across the battlefield, and the enemy's forces hesitated for the first time in their existence. Humanity did not. They pressed forward, unleashing everything they had. The darkness that had spread across the stars for so long was now being pushed back, its advance shattered, its ships reduced to burning wreckage. And as the last enemy warship turned to flee, something they had never done before, the final strike came. A single human dreadnought, its hull painted with scars from battle, moved into position and fired its main weapon. A beam of energy, compressed into a thin, white-hot lance, tore across the battlefield and found its target. The final enemy ship ceased to exist. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time since the war had begun, the enemy fleet was gone. The invincible force that had crushed entire empires had been wiped out. The Council, watching from afar, was left in stunned silence. And in that moment, they understood what had happened. This had not been just a battle. It had not been a desperate last stand. It had been a message. Humanity had struck first. And now, the galaxy knew the truth. Earth was no longer just another planet. Humanity was no longer just another species. They were warriors. And they were just getting started. The war had seemed unwinnable. The enemy had consumed entire empires, their fleets moving like a storm that never ended. Every species that resisted had been crushed, their planets reduced to lifeless rock, their histories erased. The Galactic Council, once the supreme power of the known universe, had been reduced to desperate survivors hiding in the ruins of their own arrogance. But then, humanity had struck. Their first attack had shattered the illusion of the enemy's invincibility. Their warships had burned through the darkness. Their weapons had torn through the monsters that had once seemed unstoppable. And now, as the fires of battle still smoldered in the void, something even more impossible happened. The rest of the galaxy stood up. For years, the other species had cowered, watching in fear as one world after another fell. They had believed there was no hope, that fighting back was pointless. But when humanity had launched their counterattack, when they had wiped out an entire enemy fleet, something had changed. The galaxy had seen them do the impossible. The species that had once been mocked, dismissed as primitive, had become the first to stand against the darkness. And now, the others were ready to follow. From the shattered remnants of fallen empires, warships began to rise. The battered fleets of the old galactic powers, once thought destroyed, re-emerged from hiding. Engineers worked tirelessly, refitting ancient vessels, salvaging weapons, and modifying outdated technology. What was once a fractured, defeated galaxy became an army. The Council, for all its past failures, was no longer the ruling body of the stars. It was now just another piece in the last desperate stand of civilization itself. But humanity did not wait for them to catch up. Even as the other species prepared, human forces pushed forward. Their fleets did not linger to celebrate their victories. Their soldiers did not rest. They had seen what the enemy could do, and they knew the war was far from over. They moved like hunters, their warships striking deep into enemy-controlled space, destroying supply lines, cutting off reinforcements, forcing the enemy to react. And for the first time, the enemy made mistakes. They spread themselves thin, desperate to stop the humans before they could gain too much ground. But that was exactly what humanity wanted. The enemy tried to contain Earth's forces. The rest of the galaxy struck. On the frozen world of Valen IV, where the last survivors of the Avoran Empire had hidden for years, the Avoran fleets rose from the ice and launched a surprise attack. Their sleek, insect-like ships, once thought lost, swarmed over the enemy's forward bases, cutting through their defenses like blades. In the skies above the ruined cities of Ketharis Prime, the remnants of the once mighty Ketharan military, their bodies covered in cybernetic implants, hacked into enemy warships and turned their own weapons against them. Across dozens of systems, species that had once sworn never to fight again took up arms. And at the heart of it all was humanity. Human generals led the charge, their strategies unpredictable, their tactics unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While the other species fought with honor, with tradition, with the rules of warfare they had followed for millennia, humanity fought to win. They did not care for noble duels or battle formations. They fought with deception, with ambushes, with overwhelming firepower. They used every trick, every weapon, every ruthless method they had learned across centuries of war on their own planet. And the galaxy followed their lead. The enemy, once so sure of their dominance, began to falter. They had never faced a war like this. They had never fought against an enemy that refused to break. For the first time in their existence, they were not the unstoppable force, they were the hunted. The final battle was coming. Humanity knew it. The Council knew it. The entire galaxy knew it. The enemy's stronghold, deep within the dead space of the void, was now within reach. It was a place of nightmares where the enemy had launched their first attack, where their monstrous leaders hid in the darkness, believing they were safe. But they were wrong. Humanity's warships led the charge. The combined fleets of the galaxy followed. This was no longer a battle for survival. This was retribution. And as the first human dreadnought fired its weapons, as the warships of the United Galaxy tore through the enemy's final defenses, a single message echoed across the stars, a message not of fear, but of defiance. We are here. And the galaxy stood together.